Welcome, everyone. My name is Jacqueline Mertz. I am the Museum Programs Coordinator here at the National Museum of the Pacific War. So we are really delighted to have Project Recover here with us today. We're looking forward to learning more about the important work that they are doing, and I know our viewers are as well.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to join you today.
Yep, thank you for having us. Much appreciated.
So we recently had an event down at the National Museum of the Pacific War, and it's always a pleasure to reconnect with such an incredible organization, museum, and now friends, subscribers, and members of the museum. It's always a pleasure to work with you, and we look forward to sharing more about the work of Project Recover. I know several of you have watched the documentary To What Remains on our work, and this presentation will add to that and give you a general overview of our work. And we'll have some time for some Q&A at the end. So without further ado, let's begin. So things that we're going to talk about today, we'll do a little bit of introductions of ourselves. We'll tell you about the story of our work, how we were created, now close to 3 decades, the research and investigative work that goes into this, some underwater search techniques and how we go about our work in the underwater environment, ultimately recovery, and then the impact of this work, really why we do the work that we do. Slide. So a little bit about myself. My name is Derek Abbey, and I've been a part of Project Recover now for more than 18 years. If you saw the film, I was a Marine aviator and went to a World War II reunion like was depicted in the film, and that's when I met our founder, Dr. Pat Scannon, who you'll learn a little bit more about. Him and I became quick friends. He told me about the work that he was doing at the time in the nation of Palau, searching for Americans missing in action from our previous wars. And he invited me to be a member of what was then called the Bent Prop Project. I was deploying quite a bit at the time, and I finally was able to go on my first mission a short while later after coming back from a deployment to the Middle East and join the team and to do some jungle work and water work in the nation of Palau. And that year, we actually found an MIA site, and that MIA was a part of the fighter squadron that I was a member of, VMFA 121. This aviator flew during World War II out of Peleliu, and at that point, there was really no turning back as far as my involvement with the organization. I started off as a member, became a mission commander as the organization and nonprofit grew, became a board member, and about 3 years ago now took over as president and CEO of the organization. I look forward to sharing more about myself and my experience. It says Marine Corps up there. I did a whole career in the Marine Corps as an enlisted Marine and an officer. I served on the ground and in the air for 23 years, and that's ultimately what led me to this work. So with that, Colin.
Yeah, so I'm Colin Colbourn. I'm the lead historian for Project Recover. I'm also a postdoc and an adjunct professor of history at the University of Delaware. I've been with Project Recover 6 years, almost to the day now. I worked with the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency for 2 years out of graduate school on a fellowship, and then really got hooked with helping to solve these mysteries and bring people's loved ones back home. And so I sought out the folks at Project Recover, and since I was a historian of the Marine Corps, I grabbed Derek's eye at the very least, and been with Project Recover for 6 years. And have had some great opportunities to do scuba diving, field investigations, a lot of archival work. And once we start talking about sort of the history, research, and all that kind of stuff, I'll go a little bit more into what my role is.
All the work starts with Colin. That's what we like to say. And we wouldn't be able to have any of the success that we have if it wasn't for his incredible work and contributions. So that's our mission statement, and ultimately our mission statement really just boils down to the bold pieces. Our effort is to repatriate Americans still missing in action from our previous wars. To date, the official count of Americans missing in action is close to 82,000. That goes back to World War II all the way to present. When you break down the numbers, a lot of people aren't as familiar with how those numbers break down. Most people are familiar with a lot of the work that has gone on in Vietnam with our losses there. But because of the incredible work that's taken place in Vietnam and the surrounding countries, there's now less than 1600s Americans missing from that conflict. But if you go back to World War II, there's about 72,000 Americans missing from that conflict, and about 7,000 from Korea, and then a few more from other conflicts that we've been involved in. What's not included in that number is training losses and other losses outside of that period, and that'll bring that number close to about 100,000 Americans still missing in action. And believe it or not, there's still plenty of Americans that are still missing in our mountains, in the lakes of our nation, and off the coasts of our nation for our service members that were participating in preparing for conflict on behalf of our nation. But they're just as missing to their families, and we do what we can to bring them home. That's ultimately the intention of our mission, is to have an impact on those families that have sacrificed the most. We make a promise to those that don the cloth of our nation and swear an oath to the Constitution that we'll do anything and everything that we can to bring them home should they fall in battle. And, the consequences of war have left that, that promise has still yet to be kept, but there's no expiration date on that promise. And we're going to continue to do everything that we can to bring that number as close to zero, if not zero, if possible. Slide. So who does this impact? I mentioned, you swear an oath to the Constitution, and we're going to keep that promise to bring you home if you fall in battle. Most of the time, the task of keeping that promise is left to the service members themselves. Those that are fighting alongside of each other, they're the ones that are tasked with keeping that promise on our battlefields. And many times, again, the consequences of war have left these service members still missing. So those individuals, those that have donned the cloth of our nation, that are active duty and veterans, are definitely impacted. And individuals across the nation are impacted in different ways. We are very aware of the family members that are impacted. Many times when we do this work, we are the first organization or first entity at all that has confirmed and acknowledged the loss of their loved one. They've received telegrams in the past, but that's left open this ambiguous loss where there's still hope that this service member has survived in some way. They don't know what happened to them, and so it's hard to move forward through that grieving process as we regularly grieve, because there's not a body, there's not ceremony around it, and those role changes haven't occurred. So that has a huge impact on these families. Just knowing that somebody has that is looking for their loved one on their behalf and doesn't have necessarily a direct connection to our government or our military, has a significant impact. And as you can imagine, when somebody's repatriated, that has a significant impact, which we'll get into as we go home. And because this is a promise that's made by our nation as a collective and the community around them, our nation as a whole and communities are impacted across the board. So when did this start? In the picture you see in the upper right, Pat Scannon, Dr. Pat Scannon is the founder of our organization. And in 1993, he was part of another group working in the nation of Palau, and they were searching for a Japanese trawler that was sunk at the time during World War II by then Ensign George Herbert Walker Bush. And we all know that he went on to be the president of the United States, the 41st president of the United States. And they were searching for this trawler. They actually quickly found it and documented that site. And Pat found himself with some extra time on his hands. And so he hired a guide in Palau and asked the guide to take him to World War II wreckage and historic sites like that. Palau is a destination for many across the world for diving, but he was more interested in what happened during World War II. And one of the sites that the guide took him to was this wing. And Pat immediately recognized that it was an American wing. And he asked the guide what happened to the aircraft and what happened to the crew. And the guide didn't have an answer. And so Pat took it upon himself to start researching what happened to this aircraft and crew. And during that research, after he got home, he realized that there were a number of losses from the conflicts in and around Palau during World War II. And so he took it upon himself to start going back to the nation to search the jungles and the waters for these missing Americans. And most of the time he would search for aircraft, because it's easier to find an aircraft that's been missing for 6, 7, 8 decades than it is to find a human individual. You can find an aircraft, you can document that aircraft, and you immediately know, because of the records that are kept, who's associated with it and if they're MIA. Pat quickly realized from working in the mangrove jungles and other austere environments in Palau that it might not be the safest work to do by himself. And so we started bringing other like-minded individuals together to start doing missions once a year to the nation of Palau. And that was the start of what would become Project Recover. It was, at the time, the title was the Bent Prop Project, and they would do one mission a year, every year, to the nation of Palau. And that's what I joined when I started this movement. And as we move forward, we began to bring on partners and scale our organization. Success brought attention. We created the nonprofit around that. In 2012, we partnered with the Scripps Institution of Oceanography and the University of Delaware, initially just as a unofficial partnership, but that partnership eventually grew to what is now Project Recover, and allowed us to scale our efforts around the world, multiple missions a year in multiple countries. And we'll talk about some of those statistics as we move along. As I mentioned, our primary partners are at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography and the University of Delaware, and we receive significant support and wouldn't be able to do the work that we do without the generosity of the Friedkin Group.
All right, that means that's my turn then. Talk about the history. Okay, so with all of this great technology, these great tools that we use to search underwater and on land, which we'll talk about in a little bit. The question is, how do we know where to go? These are 80-year-old now, 80 plus, we're getting on 80 plus year old cases, aircraft accidents, basically, in sometimes miles out into the ocean. How do we know where to go? And it all starts with basic historical research at archives all over the world. A lot of that research starts at the National Archives and then branches out into different archives, including at the Nimitz archives over at the Pacific War Museum, which the archivist Chris there has helped me tremendously on some of these things. At the National Archives, of course, you have your base, your required documents for each case. When an aircraft goes down, there's generally an action report, whether it's the Navy or the U.S. Army Air Force. That action report will sometimes have a little bit of information. Sometimes it will have a lot of information, including a beautiful map with an X that marks the supposed spot. And then from there, we move on to corroborate that information with personnel files. When an individual died or a crew perished, each individual had what's called an individual deceased personnel file, and that included the investigation that went into their death at the time. And of course, we have 400,000 deaths in World War II alone. And so some of those investigations, because of time, because of technology, and for a lot of different reasons, they were not very in-depth. Sometimes they were tremendously in-depth, and you'll see 100-page personnel files that get down into the nitty-gritty. Sometimes it's 4 pages and it just says, they went missing. So from there, we dig further down into archival bits of information that we can put together that they weren't able to do shortly after the war. Including unit histories, examining photographs that were brought back from the units that may have had little details that investigators or personnel didn't notice at the time. The photograph you see here of this giant explosion, we've dialed down into a sequence of photos that we can tell that this is actually an airplane, the airplane that bombed the ship, actually, that's flying out of control out of the plume of smoke. And so we're able to conduct a search based on the wreckage of that ship for the aircraft. Of course, it also goes down into different reference materials, memoirs, newspaper accounts. Sometimes when a son or nephew died, the family would write to the commanding officer and say, what happened? And the commanding officer may have written back and given a detailed account that sometimes they'll even publish in the newspaper. And so those things, investigators might not have had at the time. Now we're able to aggregate all this research together in order to give us a good picture of where this might be. And of course, aviation reference manuals, including pieces, parts. We're going to talk a little bit about when those things come into play, but helping us understand how the aircraft operated, how it worked, what its weaknesses or strengths were. Those are all things that play into our investigations as we do the historical research. So one of the other major things we do is we prioritize these cases. Derek was talking about how there's 80,000 missing, and over the decades now of Ben Prop, and especially in the last 10 years with Project Recover, we've now begun to build up a database of cases that doesn't represent all 80,000 at this point in time, but as we build the archival information, we're able to add case on case, and as family members contact us, we're able to add that case if we haven't already been tracking it already, or the information that family may already have. We're able to add that information in, and then we're going to take all these cases, and all of us together, the historians, the volunteers, the oceanographers, the archaeologists, we're going to put all our expertise together in order to rank each case based on a number of factors. Historical information, of course. What is the accuracy of the witness report? Were they 20 miles away and they thought they saw an explosion, or did they witness the actual aircraft crash, right at a very specific place offshore? What is the viability of this lost information? Is it something someone thought they saw, or is it something that enemy reports reported? What is the viability of the lost information we're looking at? Are there other cases in the vicinity? Every expedition that we go on to search for these aircraft is a tremendous enterprise. It's a lot of people, it's a lot of money, it's very expensive. And so we like to also rank cases based on what else is in the vicinity. Are there, a dozen different aircraft in this small area that will raise our hopes of being able to find at least one of them during our search? Of course, geopolitical factors. This is unfortunately some of our the least popular one to have to look into, especially now with COVID. I didn't put pandemic on this list, but that is certainly part of the issue at this point. But safety, security, what's the outlook for things like terrorism or even diplomatic relationships? A lot of the action in World War II, some of these cases happened in places where we don't have good diplomatic relations with that country. How is that going to play into our search? And of course, there's oceanographic factors. What are the depths we're looking at? What is the underwater terrain? Is this huge canyons or towering coral heads? These are all obstacles for even smart underwater robots that we put out into the ocean. Commercial fishing is another big one that we're looking at in terms of case prioritization. It's a problem, especially in Europe, where giant net trawlers will actually drag entire planes or break them into pieces and drag them. Sometimes they're dragging them away from the original site. In one case they dragged it up from a site where we never would have found it and actually brought it up. So it's got its ups and downs, but those are these factors that we're always looking into. And of course, the number one thing that we're looking for is what is the potential for recovery of remains? Our ultimate goal is not to find an airplane because it had an interesting, crash. Our job is to bring these airmen, these military personnel back home to their families. If we're looking at what part of this, case may tell us that, oh, maybe there's no remains inside, or if it's been trawled, maybe they've been removed from the airplane. The airplane for us is almost like a grave marker. It's a place, it's standing up off the ocean floor and saying, hey, this is where I am, so that we can hopefully go down and do a recovery, which Derek's going to talk about in a little bit. So these are the things that we use to prioritize our cases. And all the factors, they weigh differently. We all have different opinions on it, but this is all part of our team effort. Once we have decided on a case or on a location, we often build what we call a campaign. So this is going to be, we're going to spend several different years or multiple missions to different places. And it includes talking to people, talking to the locals. Often the locals are going to have information that we and the reports will never have. Local fishermen, witnesses. The center photo here, the guy in the red, witnessed executions. And so these are all things that we can only learn by going to these places and talking to the people, as well as just investigating, the little leads that maybe didn't come to anything in the 1940s, but maybe today we can use some different technology on land in order to help figure that out. And that, of course, almost always starts with local information and working with local partners, which is something that we value very highly. Underwater search. This is, where a lot of our 21st century technology comes into play. Matt and Eric, our two UD project scientists and engineer, are holding a REMUS 100. This is the primary tool for search that we use at Project Recover. It is an underwater sonar, I'll show you on the next slide, that scans the seafloor in a mowing motion. On the right here, that's Barry, the underwater ROV. Of course, there are a lot of cases where we don't have the diving, either the dive team with us or the technology to do the diving, the ability to do the diving. And so a lot of times we have to use remotely operated vehicles in order to examine, a lot of the time it's just rocks or coral or junk, but sometimes it's that airplane that we're looking for. And of course, dive gear, cameras, doing photogrammetry. I'm going to talk about that here in a little bit. So underwater search. So on the left-hand side here, this is a REMUS vehicle. It has two side scan sonar that are off to the side, and it paints a picture of the underwater that is much like these camels here, the shadows from these camels. So it paints a shadow off to the side. What we do is we sort of mow the lawn with this device, and it paints a picture called a waterfall that was playing here. This is often what we spend our entire nights searching and watching every expedition that we're on. And believe it or not, in this waterfall here, there is an airplane. It's right here. Does that look like an airplane to anyone? This is sort of the challenge that we're often in, is that when these airplanes and aircraft, when they hit the water, when they're in these violent accidents, they often don't look like airplanes anymore. It's not an easy thing to usually pick out. And that's why we have to do a lot of the historical research to sort of say, what should the airplane look like based on what we know about it, et cetera, et cetera. And in order to sort of pick out little things like, this straight lines, potentially propellers, things that stand out to us. And we go through a lot of, not aircraft for each one. And so it is quite a challenging prospect. This is a picture of Truck Lagoon showing in the Pacific now today called Chuk, showing, what those lines we see in orange are the actual areas that we've searched. And that's sort of what it looks like. You can tell each mission is different, but it paints an entire picture of what it looks like underwater so that we can get an idea of what's down there. When we do find something in the sonar, this is a lot what it looks like. This is an SPD that we located, and as you can see, we've now labeled a lot of what we found here. But when you're looking at this, it does not look like anything at all. This has come from sending an ROV down and actually examining the wreckage, so we can say, oh, that's what this is. But as you can see, when we're looking at the sonar, it takes a very close eye, and now we're developing machine learning techniques so that artificial intelligence will help us look through this stuff in order to locate and find these aircraft. Once we do find an aircraft, we do advanced photogrammetry, sometimes 3D models, using cameras in order to paint an entire picture of the site. And this is not just to have some cool pictures, although it is very nice to have cool pictures. This is because the next step in the process is the recovery. And in order to do it, it's a recovery, it's an entire archaeological project. And we're able to sort of paint the picture, not only for our team that will be coming behind us with dredges and divers to show them exactly what the terrain looks like, where the pieces and parts are, et cetera. And it gives us an idea of what the aircraft accident profile was. When we do our documentation, we'll zoom in on different parts of the aircraft, and we will match those parts up with the exact manuals, We'll make sure that we know exactly what aircraft this is, down to the variant itself if we can, in order to prove that it is the aircraft that we're looking for. A lot of times people say, well, where's the number? It's got a tail number. Can't you figure that out? Unfortunately, most of that stuff, the easy stuff, especially in the Pacific, has gone away. And so we're using history, and we're using, this kind of information in order to identify these aircraft. All right, I'll pass it back over to Derek to talk about the next step.
Thank you, Colin. This is ultimately what we're striving for, is to conduct a recovery effort to recover the remains of these missing service members and return them home. It is an archaeological process, but not an archaeological process like most people would think of. I often refer to it as destructive archaeology. It's less about documenting and preserving the sites, and it's all about recovering the service members associated with this site. And so we use science and evidence to drive us in this process. It is an archaeological process in the sense that it's gridded out and it's all documented. But the aircraft itself, I'm sorry to say for my aviator and aircraft fans, that's not preserved. We will tear and destroy the aircraft to recover remains. And that's the intention, recovering all the osseous material that might be there and any other further material that can assist with the identification process. And those are items that are pretty obvious, like a dog tag is something that's very obvious, rings, other things, other possessions that might be able to assist, but also uniforms, life-saving gear that give us an idea of where this crew member was in the aircraft, especially if it's a multi-person aircraft. Knowing where they were at will help identify them. And so all that material is then returned to the United States, and through official channels, through the host nation and the United States representatives, to a DPAA lab, a Defense POW MIA accounting lab. And then the identification process will take place there. They have to do the identification, and they do it blindly. And they use a number of things that most people are aware of. Today, people think automatically about DNA, and that is very much part of the process. But believe it or not, we still rely heavily on dental records. Teeth are something that is preserved very, very well over time. But then also those other artifacts that can help with identification. If there's dog tags and other personal material, other things like that, that allow to triangulate and come up with a very firm identification of that individual. That's the recovery process. It's very similar on land and water. Underwater is a little bit more complicated, as you can imagine, because you're working in that underwater environment. But you can see in this picture, typically we'll use a suction system that pulls debris to the surface, and then every bit of that debris is screened, looking for all the materials that we've discussed. And then it's overseen by an archaeologist, either an underwater archaeologist or land archaeologist, that determines all the appropriate material to be recovered. Any other material not part of the identification remains at the site. So the wreckage remains at the site. If there's some sort of environmental issue, appropriate agencies will come in to take care of that. Things like fuel or potentially unexploded ordnance, which actually adds to the humanitarian effort of this mission. These are artifacts of war that can have a negative impact on the environment, of course, be dangerous to people. And so we want to also help with that and do anything that we can to assist with that. But that's the overall recovery process. And ultimately, that's the intention of our mission, is to start with that research and get all the way to here so that those remains can be returned home, ultimately identified and returned to their family. It's been mentioned the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency is the official organization for the United States that conducts this mission. We are a nonprofit, non-government agency, and the only nonprofit, non-government agency that is fully vertical, from research all the way to recovery, both water and land, that supplements the DPAA mission, and that's something that we're very, very proud of. Slide. So this is kind of the overview of the process and everything that we've already discussed, that full vertical piece that we mentioned, documentation, all the way to recovery. I mentioned then those osseous materials and artifacts are returned for the identification process to take place. And ultimately, once the identification takes place, the official notification of the family occurs, and then that individual is memorialized appropriately with full military honors based on the decisions of the family. So they could be interned at Arlington National Cemetery in Washington, D.C., or the family can make a decision to have them interned locally at a veteran cemetery or their home plot, whatever it happens to be. It's all up to the family, and it's an incredible thing to witness. And this is success to us. These are all cases that we have been involved in. Arlington National Cemetery on the top, or Small Town USA, Portage, Pennsylvania, with the children lining the streets and their hands over their hearts, waving flags. Each and every one of these events is incredible to witness. They're unique in their own way, and every one of them is very, very special. Every time we locate or document a site, we do a flag ceremony at that site, and we fold a flag for that individual or every individual on that site. And ultimately, that flag is passed from us to their families once the identification occurs. And the lower right-hand side, you can see that's a sister of an MIA, and she's received her flag, and it's a very cherished artifact for these families. But this is ultimately really what we're striving for. This has a positive impact on not only the family members, but the community across the board, and that's what we're striving. Kind of touch on that a little bit. Slide. We mentioned individuals, families, communities, the nation, our active duty service members. Now this promise is kept that we mentioned in the very, very beginning. It has an incredible impact on our service members. As a former service member myself, this is the right thing to do. Leave no service member behind. That's what we strive for. And as I mentioned, you know, we're the ones when we're fighting alongside our brothers and sisters in arms to hold that promise. And sometimes because of the consequences of war, it's not kept, but now it is ultimately. So individuals are impacted. Those families, that grieving process is allowed to continue. Healing occurs. Answers to questions that have been held for decades are provided. And many times, even though you have second, third, now fourth generation removed family members, they are just as impacted as those individuals that knew this person firsthand. That void in that healing process is passed down from generation to generation. We've seen it over and over. We've interacted with families over and over where they've been told stories about this loved one, or they've been sat down and told the legacy that they need to live up to. But now those stories are reality. This mythical figure is a real person, and the memorials are very much celebrations as well, where communities, families come together. Many times those family members might not have met, but it's a humanitarian effort and unifying effort that is more and more important in the divisive nature of our country today. And ultimately, it goes all the way up to that nation. The nation makes a promise as a collective, but now that promise is kept and trust is built in our nation. And for future service members, you know, this is important. This is our community and our collective coming out to say, hey, this is a promise that we make, and we're going to keep it no matter what it takes. Incredible impact. And once you witness it, really there's no turning back. So a little bit of statistics. I mentioned, you know, for a long time, we did one mission a year per year. Now we do multiple missions a year all over the world. So far, we've done work in 21 different countries, to include the United States. And that includes the European theater as well as the Pacific theater. And we have done missions in the Middle East for Operation Desert Storm, Desert Shield, where people have gone missing. Today, we've located or documented more than 60 aircraft associated, or 60 sites associated with missing Americans, because that includes POWs that were executed. Of those, there's more than 200 MIAs associated with these sites. 70 of them have been designated lost at sea because of naval tradition. They're part of the USS Abner Reed, which was part of it was sunk off the coast of Alaska. And the Navy has determined that site will not be disturbed. And so that will be their forever resting place. Unless something changes in the future, if somebody's going to disturb the site, they could change that and recover those remains. But 15 have been repatriated, and now more than 100 are in some state of open case. Osseous material has been recovered, and it's in a lab waiting for identification or going through the identification process, or recovery missions are still being scheduled, or something along those lines. But we're looking forward to providing answers to those families in the very, very near future. So what can you do? The biggest thing you could do is go to our website and learn more about this work and why it's important. We are a nonprofit organization, so we cherish our partnerships with places like the National Museum for the Pacific War that brings visibility to this mission, but we're also a volunteer-based organization, so we're always looking for people to pitch in. This is truly every American's mission. So we rely on volunteers and their expertise, but we also rely on the community to share information with us. Colin mentioned it. We've had Ben reached out to us before the presentation today to share the story of his uncle. We're going to look, or relative, we're going to look into that. I've seen people in the chat talk about their lost loved ones. We want to hear from you. We want to know about your loved one, and we'll provide any information that we have. And we'll also add that to our database. And it could lead to actionable information. We've had family members reach out to us and have that missing information that we need to take the next step in moving forward with this mission. So we rely on the community, not only to do our work as a nonprofit, but to contribute to this mission. So if you have a skill set that can contribute to this mission, we also want to hear from you. Let us know. We have a process for volunteers to go through, and it could be all sorts of different things. It could be, the administrative side. It could be you are an underwater ninja of some sort and can add to our mission that way. We have forensic anthropologists reach out to us. Anybody and everybody. We're a very innovative organization, so we want to hear from you and how you might contribute to this mission. Ultimately, I mentioned it, we're a nonprofit organization, so we rely on the generosity of our community. Not everybody can travel the world or dive the oceans or search the jungles, but everybody can give from their couch, and so that can also be done through our website at projectrecover.org. All of those things can be done through our website, whether you're a family member, you're a volunteer, or you want to support, go to projectrecover.org. There's also many ways of learning more about our organization, following and supporting. We're very active on social media. We share a lot of these stories. We think it's very important that these short stories keep on being told to the next generation and the greater community. So you can find us on all the social media platforms. I know many of you have watched To What Remains. If you haven't watched it yet, you should have a link from the museum. But if down the road you want to share it with your friends or you want to watch it again, it is available on Amazon Prime, Apple TV, Google Play, and things like that. And it's a very impactful film. It's something that we're very proud of. It obviously talks about the work of Project Recover, but most importantly, it talks about the impact that this work has on these families and the community in general. And so please reach out to us. Please connect with us on these platforms, and communicate with us. And with that, I know we've already had a number of questions coming in, and we look forward to sharing more about our work.
That was a great presentation. And yes, we have quite a lot of questions. A lot of those were about how to volunteer. So thank you again for answering that question right off the bat.
Look at some of them.
Volunteer opportunities. I guess another one of those questions that kind of tags onto that is where or when is your next project that you're going to be working on?
Well, the work never stops. So research happens year-round, constantly. We're engaging with people every single day. But we just have had people return to the field. We have a team heading out to Croatia here in the very near future. We have another set of volunteers heading to Denmark for some work, and then we'll be back in the Pacific very soon. We're getting ready to kind of harness some of the momentum that we've had from the release of the To What Remains over the last 6-7 months of sharing that around the nation. So we're going into a major fundraising campaign to bring additional visibility and further scale our work. Time is not our friend. And as you can imagine, erosion takes place on all these sites. But development is also encroaching on them. And so we're doing what we can to really continue to scale. We've proven the model where we've scaled from one mission now to, as I mentioned, multiple missions throughout the year, but we've created a model that can continue to be scaled, and we can really boost this work to bring more people home. So we're constantly doing research, and we're constantly pushing people out the door on missions as much as we can. The last couple of years have been a little bit difficult with COVID, but we're back at it. So wherever we can access, we're working.
So our next question is coming from Karen. She's asking, have you been able to recover any submarines?
Well, we haven't recovered any submarines, but we have found submarines. As you can imagine, we're looking for Americans missing in action, but we spend a lot of time in these austere environments, whether it's the oceans or the jungles, and we find a lot of things that we're not searching for. So we found several sunken ships to include submarines. We found former enemy aircraft and artifacts as well. We found ancient sites. And every time we find any site that's not directly associated with our mission or is a foreign nation site, we document that site and we turn that over to all the appropriate agencies. So we turn it over to the host nation agency, and then we work it through the appropriate embassies to ensure that the owning nation or the original nation is aware of that site, and they'll take appropriate actions as needed. And one thing actually, it's been really interesting as we've grown in our expertise and grown in visibility is we've had people from other nations reach out to us to assist with their own searches and things like that. So we can lend our protocols and expertise to helping. But our priority, obviously, as you can imagine, is searching for Americans.
This is from Sherry. She asked, I guess you were talking about the historical documentation. So can citizens access the aircraft action report?
Yeah, yes, they can. In fact, technology has brought a lot of those reports to our doorstep because Ancestry.com runs a site called Fold3. And as part of that site, they've actually scanned a lot of the microfilm at the National Archives. And so on Fold3, you can find thousands of missing aircrew reports, which is the primary loss report for the U.S. Army Air Forces. And you can find thousands of U.S. Navy action reports as well, from the carrier level, the squadron level, the carrier air group level, all of that. And a lot of that is accessible. It's not free, unfortunately. And so if you want to go to the archives also, yeah, you can request all that documentation. Right now, the only documentation, I'll be corrected by, I'm sure someone, the only documentation that's restricted at this point are the personnel files, especially the individual deceased personnel files. You can get those from the National Personnel Records Center at St. Louis. However, that has been closed for years since the pandemic began. I don't even know if they're going to go back to a researcher model or what's going to happen. And so a lot of those are not publicly available. It takes a little bit of digging around to find those. But yeah, almost all of that's publicly available now. The Air Force Historical Research Agency at Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama has almost all of the unit histories, as well as accident reports and those things as well. And they're open for research too.
Our next one is coming from Philip. He's asking finding out a little bit more information about, are there still active recovery efforts ongoing in Europe? So I know you talked about Denmark, but besides Denmark, have you done more things in Europe as well?
Yes, we've been to several locations in Europe, actually, and there's other teams as part of DPAA that are over there right now. So there's a lot of work that is happening on land in Europe and in the waters that surround the various nations there. So yeah, we've done work in Croatia, Hungary, Italy, Denmark, England, and the list keeps on growing.
Like to know if you've done any expeditions in Vietnam.
You want to take it, Colin?
Yeah, sure. Yes, we actually we just started. We're one of the only ocean search partners for Vietnam right now with the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency. They are very particular. It's a very special relationship for the United States in terms of allowing us to go and search for those remains. So we were very proud. February 2020, we launched our first search mission for a B-52 that crashed off the coast of Vietnam. And we found not only the aircraft, or parts of the aircraft, but remains that we were able to bring home, resulting in our first Vietnam identification. Unfortunately, a lot of that got lost with the pandemic hitting shortly thereafter. but we have had another investigation since then, and there are a lot of opportunities, I think, to work on water stuff out there, and we are very enthusiastic to do that.
Okay, this is just from someone anonymous. How many of the 80,000 missing remains are from ships that sunk at sea, both cargo, merchant ships and warships, compared to, I guess, airplanes or submarines?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And not only are there a lot, but, for vessels, as Derek was mentioning about the USS Abner Reed sailors, though they're often designated as their final resting place. They are considered, sort of not officially resolved. They're still on the list of the missing, but there will not be a recovery on those ships as we do with aircraft. I think I saw a number that said 25,000 to 30,000. I believe the Defense Department has a fact sheet on that as well. And so it's a great question. A lot of, not all of them, but a good portion are amongst ships, not only the U.S. Navy vessels and merchant vessels, but also the hell ships, Japanese hell ships that were carrying American POWs that were unfortunately sunk for whatever reason. And so, yeah, so a very good question. Quite a few of them are ships at sea.
I just wanted to kind of highlight one thing. Since we started this work, I mean, even over the last 5 years, technology is advancing so rapidly. And what that brings to us is the ability to look in more places and conduct recovery in more places. So, 10 years ago, recoveries were happening at 100 feet or less. Now we've moved beyond that, and our search missions are going a lot deeper. Our colleagues at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography have documented MIA sites, deeper than 1,000 feet, and technology just keeps on advancing, which is it's going to allow us to search in more areas and recover in more areas. It's a little bit counterintuitive, but our technology underwater is advancing or allowing us to execute this mission in more places than the technology on land is developing. I mean, we just did a mission in Palau in a mangrove jungle, and our GPS accuracy was between 3 meters and 80 meters. And you think what we advanced so far, this technology is something that we've kind of taken advantage of when we walk around with our phones and we know exactly where we're at. But even on land, sometimes we need more advancements in technology to assist us with some of these missions. But all of that stuff is advancing at a rate it's a breakneck speed, that's for sure. If you would have asked me 10 years ago if I could imagine what I'd be doing today, there's no way I would be accurate in that assessment. And I can only imagine where we'll be in the next 5 to 10 years.
This is from Mike. Are there any foreign countries or other organizations conducting similar recovery operations for their citizens? And if so, do you work with them?
There's other organizations that are out there. I'll start on the American side. There's other organizations, and especially universities, that are starting to contribute to this mission. As you can imagine, in our own partners, that the technology that we're utilizing and advancing on this mission can be applied in other areas. And as they advance that technology, it can be applied to this area. So everybody's interested on the research and advancement of these technologies and protocols and things like that. And then there's other nonprofits that are emerging to conduct mostly different pieces of the mission, but they're all contributing in different ways. And our Department of Defense realized that, in order for them to advance as rapidly as they can, they've reached out to partners in the community, us being one of them. When it comes to other nations, we're really the only nation that I'm aware of that is fully committed to this mission in the way that the United States is. And there's other nations that are that do it, but they're kind of more passive about it. Hey, we found something. I think there's a service member associated with the site, but that's changing over time as well. To include like the Japanese sites that we found early on, there was less interest in that when we first started doing this work. Well, as time has passed, they become more interested in recovering their own lost service members. And it depends on the nation, but there's not any other nation that's as committed to this mission as the United States is.
Yeah, I wanted to add on to that too, that there are also foreign non-governmental organizations that are also very dedicated, organizations in France and Italy that have found dozens of American aircraft. They are very involved there. We did a mission in Hungary, and I've never met so many, Air Force historians than I did in Hungary among just locals who have an intense amount of interest, and have helped not only us but also the U.S. government and other families locate their loved ones as well. So it's interesting, even in these places, these faraway places, there are others looking for American MIAs as well.
And I mean, it can't be reiterated enough, and we've mentioned it already, but we wouldn't be able to execute this mission without the support of the host nations. And as Colin mentioned, not only is it the government entities that permit us and allow us to work in their nation, but we have met incredible supporters and contributors to this mission that are not American, that do not have any connection to MIA, but it aligns with their values and they believe it's the right thing to do. And that includes former enemies of ours that are very committed to this mission. It's absolutely incredible to witness and work with these people, and it's something that I know each of us cherish as part of our experience.
Okay, so I think we have time for probably about 2 more questions. This is from Hank. He is asking, what is the oldest recovery that you have found? Have you found anything prior to World War II?
We have not found anything prior to World War II, but I do know that I believe that the Defense Department has identified remains from a wreck of the War of 1812. I'm not sure if they've gone back farther than that, but I believe there was in one of the Great Lakes, there was a ship that was located with remains from the War of 1812, some Civil War remains, but and I have seen recently as well World War I. Records are a lot more difficult in terms of getting any ideas on where these guys went missing, but yeah, for us, World War II and on.
Well, doesn't have anything to do with recovery, but we have found ancient sites too, especially in Palau. We found ancient altars in the middle of the jungle, and one of our archaeologists is an expert in ancient archaeology, and so we've contributed a lot to her research, where we'll find something and we're kind of like, well, it's not aluminum, but you're interested in this, Jolie, aren't you? And she's very excited because this is her wheelhouse. And then if we've worked in Italy, and Italy, you can't put a spoon in the ground without running into something of some ancient artifacts. And so in working in that environment, we have Italian experts that ensure that we're not disturbing any ancient sites or things like that. But we found, of course, all sorts of different ancient artifacts, but no recoveries going back that far, that's for sure.
So we did have a little bit more questions about who do they reach out to if they have information on a family member, their father, their grandfather. Who specifically do they reach out to? And then again, how do they volunteer with you? Where on the website do they find all this information to get those boots on the ground?
So they can contact us directly through the website for family members. For those interested in contributing to the mission as far as a volunteer or being a Project Recover member, there's a process for that, and that is at the bottom of our mission, vision, and values page on our website. We do that intentionally to make sure that people read our mission, vision, and values statements. We are driven by that and uncompromising in any way when it comes to that. So we encourage people to read through that, and if you're still interested and you get to the bottom, there's a link to click on to start the process. But it's a one-stop shop really for all the people that are interested in our work, and from there the appropriate individuals on our side will get that information and then reach out appropriately to the individuals or families that reach out to us.
Yeah, and we highly encourage, if you have a family member that's missing, or if you know someone who has a family member that's missing, contact us. You never know. Maybe we've already conducted a search, or maybe it's something that we've already looked into and got some good information on, or maybe they'll be counted. We'll make sure that they have a place in our database so that we can dig deeper into their case. So it's really important that they, through our website, just, contact us, give us as much information as and we will dig right into that.
And, we mentioned the 80 to 100,000 people that are still missing from our nation. And most people don't think about the math, but that's millions of family members that have an MIA in their family. And every single time we do an event, we have family members reach out to us. There's always somebody in the audience. And it's many times they think, I don't know if you're interested in this, but I have an MIA family or MIA in my family. And we're absolutely interested in that. This is what we do. We want to have that conversation. And your family has been impacted by that loss. And we're very grateful for the sacrifice, not only made by your loved one, but their family since then. And we're going to do everything that we can to provide any information if we have it.
Thank you again so much for sharing the story and sharing your project and the mission. We hope really everyone gets a chance to watch the documentary. But again, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for your questions. And then for a full list of our events and our upcoming programs, go to pacificwar.org to check out our events calendar. Thank you again, everyone. Have a great day.